Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and felt an inexplicable emptiness? That strange void, as if something fundamental was missing. This isn't just your imagination. Over 100 years ago, Edgar Cayce, America's most documented psychic, made a statement that shocked the spiritual community. Not everyone walking among us possesses a soul. I know what you're thinking. How could this be possible? In today's video, I'll reveal the layers behind this controversial statement that may explain much of the chaos we experience in our modern world. While you observe people around you acting without the slightest trace of empathy or compassion, perhaps you're witnessing exactly what Cayce tried to warn us about. Modern science attempts to explain this phenomenon through personality disorders and psychological conditions. But what if the truth is much deeper and more spiritual than we imagine? What if certain individuals truly lack that divine spark that makes us fully human? Edgar Cayce accessed profound spiritual information while in trance states. During one of these remarkable readings in 1923, he described seeing individuals who appeared physically normal but lacked what he called the divine imprint. Essentially, empty vessels moving through life guided only by basic impulses and conditioning. In the next few minutes, I'll explore the hidden implications of this declaration that many prefer to ignore. We'll examine how various spiritual traditions interpret this apparent absence of soul, and surprisingly, how even Catholic exorcists like Father Gabriele Amorth observed similar phenomena in their practices. What you'll discover might completely change how you see the people around you. You'll learn to identify subtle signs that reveal someone's spiritual connection or disconnection, and more importantly, how to protect your own vital energy in a world where not everyone shares the same spiritual essence. The concept of soullessness isn't just a religious or spiritual idea. Philosophers throughout history have discussed this phenomenon using different terminology. In philosophy, this expression often relates to our capacity for genuine empathy, that invisible bridge connecting us to others' pain and joy. Great thinkers like Aristotle explored this idea, suggesting that the soul, anima, is what makes us truly human, manifesting in our ability to transcend selfishness and recognize the intrinsic value of other lives. When we encounter someone seemingly incapable of placing themselves in another's position, it's as if something fundamental is missing from their mental makeup. During sleep, our minds process experiences and emotions, often presenting intuitions about our own nature. Have you noticed how some people never seem to dream, or at least never remember their dreams? Some psychologists suggest this may indicate a disconnection with one's own unconscious, as if a vital part of body and mind were dormant. Carl Jung, with his theory of the collective unconscious, proposed that we're all connected to a universal reservoir of human experiences. But some individuals appear to have that connection weakened, as if their soul were temporarily detuned from that universal field. Keep watching, because in the final part of this chapter, I'll share an ancient spiritual protection technique that very few people know about, something Edgar Cayce practiced daily that can make the difference between being energetically drained or keeping your inner light intact. If you've ever felt that inexplicable empty sensation when interacting with certain people, leave a comment below. That intuition might be more significant than you imagine, and we'll explore it together. What would Edgar Cayce say about people seemingly devoid of compassion? In his readings, he often described how certain individuals had dimmed their divine light through repeated negative choices across multiple lifetimes. Isn't this disconnection similar to what modern psychologists call psychopathy or sociopathy? People incapable of feeling remorse, guilt, or genuine empathy, as if an essential part of their humanity were absent or deeply dormant, waiting for an awakening that might never occur in this incarnation. Out-of-body experiences, reported by many individuals during altered states of consciousness, offer fascinating clues about the nature of the soul. When someone describes observing their own body from outside during surgery or a near-death experience, we're encountering anecdotal evidence that something exists beyond physical matter. Transpersonal psychologists like Stanislav Grof dedicated their careers to studying these phenomena, suggesting that human consciousness isn't merely a product of the brain, but something more fundamental that, under certain circumstances, can operate independently of the physical body. This perspective aligns remarkably with Cayce's insights from his trance states. Have you ever found yourself questioning why some people seem so disconnected from any sense of morality? Philosophers like Kant would argue that the capacity to recognize and follow universal ethical principles is a direct expression of the human soul. When we see someone consistently acting against these principles, treating other human beings as mere objects to manipulate, we may be facing someone whose soul is deeply dormant. Edgar Cayce's readings frequently address this phenomenon. In one particularly striking reading from 1931, he described what he called empty vessels, physically normal humans who lack the spiritual essence that animates most of humanity. According to Cayce, these individuals weren't inherently evil. They simply lacked the divine spark that provides moral compass and spiritual connection. Modern psychology identifies these patterns as personality disorders. But does this explanation fully capture the existential void that seems to inhabit these people? The spiritual journeys described in various mystical traditions suggest that the soul can evolve or regress depending on the choices we make. When we repeatedly choose selfishness, cruelty, or indifference, we potentially weaken our connection to the spiritual world. Psychologists like Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps, observed how, even in the most inhuman conditions, some people maintained their dignity and compassion intact, while others succumbed to brutality. Wouldn't this difference reflect the development of each individual's soul? Faith in something greater than ourselves appears to be a crucial component of what it means to have a soul. Not necessarily formal religious faith, but a deep trust in the existence of meaning and purpose in life. Have you ever known someone completely devoid of this dimension? People for whom nothing seems sacred, for whom values like truth, beauty, and goodness are mere social constructs without any real foundation. Philosopher Nietzsche warned about the last man, one who has lost all capacity for admiration and reverence, living only for small pleasures and comforts, without any transcendent aspiration. Isn't this the portrait of someone whose soul is dormant? Our prophetic dreams and inexplicable intuitions suggest there exists a dimension of the mind that transcends rational, linear thought. Jungian psychologists speak about the transcendent function, the psyche's capacity to create symbols that integrate the conscious and unconscious, allowing for growth and transformation. People seemingly without souls often demonstrate a remarkable absence of this symbolic capacity, relating to the world only through the concrete and literal, unable to access the deeper dimensions of human experience. This fundamental limitation leads us to question how we can better understand the ethical and social implications of labeling certain people as soulless. In one of his most profound readings, Edgar Cayce described witnessing souls entering and leaving bodies during sleep states. He noted that some bodies continued functioning even when the soul temporarily departed, walking, talking, and even making decisions, but lacking the divine spark that gives life true meaning. Cayce emphasized that this wasn't a permanent condition, but rather a stage in the soul's evolutionary journey. What's most remarkable about Cayce's insights is how they parallel discoveries in modern neuroscience. Researchers studying consciousness have identified states where people appear fully functional, but lack emotional resonance or moral intuition, almost as if operating on autopilot. These findings suggest that the integration of body, mind, and soul may be more complex and variable than we typically assume. This understanding invites us to look more compassionately at those who seem disconnected from their spiritual nature. Rather than judging them as permanently flawed, Cayce's perspective encourages us to see them as souls in waiting, beings who haven't yet awakened to their full spiritual potential. When we speak of people without souls, we enter extremely delicate territory. Claiming some human beings don't possess souls can easily be interpreted as a form of dehumanization, the first step toward justifying discriminatory treatment. History shows how such categorizations often served as the basis for atrocities. We need only recall how totalitarian regimes began by labeling certain groups as subhuman. Edgar Cayce, despite his controversial revelations about soulless beings, always emphasized compassion. In a 1938 reading, when asked about dealing with seemingly soulless individuals, he responded, "Judge not, that ye be not judged. For even those who appear empty vessels may eventually awaken to their divine nature." This underscores a crucial point. The apparent absence of soul may be temporary, not permanent. During sleep, our minds process not only individual experiences, but also absorb collective influences that shape our worldview. Have you noticed how certain prejudicial ideas can infiltrate our thoughts, even when we consciously reject them? The notion that some people are soulless can function exactly like this, as a judgment based on behaviors we don't understand or values we don't share. This tendency to divide humanity into categories of us versus them is one of the greatest obstacles to collective spiritual evolution, creating barriers where we should build bridges. The out-of-body experiences reported by mediums suggest that the soul is a universal reality present in all human beings, regardless of their actions or beliefs. Examining different religious traditions around the world, we find a surprising convergence on this point. Virtually all recognize some form of spiritual essence inherent in each person. Buddhism speaks of the Buddha nature present in all. Hinduism recognizes the universal Atman. Abrahamic traditions affirm that we are all created in God's image. Despite this, each tradition has developed its own interpretations of how this essence might be obscured or corrupted. The body and mind function as vehicles for the soul's expression, but various factors can interfere with that expression. Deep traumas, neurological conditions, negative environmental influences, all these elements can create what appears to be an absence of soul, when in reality, we're facing a soul temporarily prevented from fully manifesting. Recent studies in epigenetics show how traumatic experiences can alter gene expression across generations, affecting behaviors without changing the fundamental DNA. Wouldn't this be a perfect metaphor for understanding how the soul's essence remains intact, even when its expression is compromised? In one particularly illuminating reading, Cayce described witnessing what he called dormant souls, divine sparks that remained unawakened through multiple lifetimes due to trauma, negative choices, or spiritual interference. However, he emphasized that even in these extreme cases, the potential for awakening always remains, no matter how deeply buried. Labeling someone as soulless would therefore be not only a conceptual error, but also a denial of the possibility of transformation and redemption that lies at the heart of virtually all spiritual traditions. After all, how many stories do we know of people who seem completely lost and yet found their way back to the light? Genuine faith invites us to see beyond appearances, recognizing the divine presence even where it seems absent. When we judge someone as soulless, we may actually be projecting our own shadows and limitations. How can we be sure that this apparently cold or cruel person isn't simply fighting an internal battle we cannot see? The incubi that sometimes disturb our sleep can be interpreted as reminders of those dark parts we all carry, and that we often prefer to project onto others, rather than confront within ourselves. Prayer and spiritual protection practices from various traditions are offered to everyone without distinction, an implicit recognition that all possess a soul that can be elevated and purified. When Cayce channeled messages from the spiritual world, he often brought words of comfort from people who in life had committed terrible acts, but in the spiritual plane had begun their process of repentance and transformation. These communications suggest that even the souls most darkened by evil eventually find their way back to the light, although this process may take many incarnations. True spiritual evolution isn't about identifying who does or doesn't have a soul, but recognizing the divine spark in everyone and working so that light can shine ever more brightly, beginning with ourselves. This perspective naturally leads us to reflect on manifestations of evil in humanity and how we can understand them without falling into the trap of dehumanization. When Edgar Cayce stated over a century ago that not everyone possessed a soul, he touched upon a question that continues to resonate deeply in our society today. The historical context in which this declaration was made differed significantly from ours. America was undergoing profound social transformations, and spiritualism was still finding its place among the country's religious traditions. The soul, as a central concept in Cayce's readings, was understood as that immortal essence evolving through multiple incarnations, learning and perfecting itself in each new cycle of life in the material body. During sleep, many people report experiences that seem to confirm this spiritual view of existence: vivid dreams, sensations of detachment, encounters with deceased loved ones. In his most detailed reading on this subject in 1925, Cayce described what he called soul catalepsy, a condition where the divine spark remains dormant, covered by layers of materialism and negative choices from past lives. Importantly, he emphasized this wasn't a permanent state, but rather a developmental stage in the soul's evolution. This observation from a different spiritual tradition seems to dialogue with scientific understandings of consciousness, suggesting that the absence of soul could be interpreted as a temporary state of spiritual disconnection, not a permanent or definitive condition. Out-of-body experiences reported by mediums like Cayce offer us a glimpse of how that phrase might be interpreted in its original context. Perhaps he was referring to very young spirits on their evolutionary path, or souls temporarily disconnected from their divine essence due to misguided choices in previous lives. In an increasingly materialistic and individualistic world like ours, this interpretation takes on renewed relevance. How many people today live completely disconnected from any spiritual dimension, as if their souls were asleep under layers of consumerism, competition, and superficiality? Astral projection, studied by both spiritualists and consciousness researchers, suggests we all have the capacity to transcend the limits of the physical body, reconnecting with our spiritual essence. Perhaps the true legacy of Cayce's controversial statement is to invite us to awaken this dormant dimension in ourselves and others. In an era marked by extreme polarization, where we often dehumanize those who think differently, this call for spiritual reconnection becomes especially urgent and necessary. Recognizing the divine spark in everyone, even in those who seem furthest from it, is the first step toward true spiritual evolution. Genuine faith, as Cayce demonstrated throughout his life, isn't expressed in judgments or condemnations, but in unconditional compassion for all beings. Observing today's world with its humanitarian, environmental, and social crises, we might ask, aren't these problems reflections of a humanity that has lost contact with its deepest spiritual dimension? The incubi that disturb humanity's collective sleep, wars, hunger, inequality, environmental destruction, wouldn't these be symptoms of this widespread disconnection with our true spiritual nature? Prayer and spiritual practices from various traditions offer paths to restore that lost connection. Cayce himself, through his mediumship and life example, showed how it's possible to live fully connected with the spiritual world, even amid the difficulties and challenges of material existence. His legacy invites us to look beyond appearances, recognizing that even those who seem most distant from any spirituality carry, though dormant, the divine spark that will someday awaken. This perspective offers us hope in dark times, reminding us that spiritual evolution is a long process extending across many lives. The prophetic dreams and visions that Cayce shared throughout his life continue to inspire millions to seek greater self-knowledge and spiritual growth. In a world where materialism and individualism seem to reign supreme, his message about the immortal nature of the soul and the importance of charity, humility, and love for one's neighbor becomes more relevant than ever. When speaking of soulless people, perhaps he was alerting us to the dangers of spiritual disconnection, not to judge or condemn, but to remind us of the importance of cultivating our spiritual dimension amid the distractions and illusions of the material world. Now that we've reached the end of this fascinating journey into the nature of the human soul, I want you to deeply reflect on how you're cultivating your own spiritual connection in a world that seems increasingly disconnected. Cayce's declaration wasn't made to judge or condemn, but to awaken in us the awareness that the soul needs to be nourished, cultivated, and protected. What if you began today to practice small moments of spiritual connection? Imagine how your life would be in 1 year if every day you dedicated just 5 minutes to quieting your mind and reconnecting with your deepest essence. Would you remain the same person, or would you become a beacon of light amid the darkness that seems to dominate so many around us? Here on this channel, we're committed to bringing content that goes beyond the surface, touching on the most fundamental questions of human existence. Do we truly have the courage to look within and confront our own shadows? Or do we prefer to continue living in automatic mode, as if our souls were asleep? The choice is yours, but remember, while some are born with a naturally strong spiritual connection, we all have the potential to awaken and strengthen that bond. What will your decision be from today? Will you continue living as if the material were all that exists? Or will you take the first step toward an authentic spiritual awakening? If you feel that this content has been uplifting and meaningful in your life, the The Super Thanks feature is a simple way to offer financial support. Your contribution helps us reach more people with this message of hope and truth. Every bit of your financial help makes a real difference. If this content touched something within you, don't keep it just for yourself. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who needs to awaken to this reality.